And then I'm going to ask you a question about the pictures when we're done. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to look at each one. What, if you think about all four of those together, is there a word or something that comes to mind about them all? Anything? Color. What did you say?
Vivid.
Vivid. Okay. Vivid. Visually appealing.
Say dramatic.
Dramatic. Could we say it's visually appealing? Is that fair? Appealing to the eyes. We like things that are visual. Is that true? We like things that are visually appealing. I think I'd much rather look at something that's visually appealing than something that's gray and blah, even though I'm wearing black and gray today. I usually wear color. I like color for the same reason. I think it's more vibrant and visual. And so when we can create things that are visual, that is typically going to be a little bit more of interest. And so luckily, what we're going to talk about today with APM, we're going to have a little element of visual in here as well. Everybody know what that is? Anybody know what I'm referring to? It's got the word visual in it. If nobody knows, that's great. You're going to learn something really fun today.
Visualization. Visualization.
Not visualization, but good guess. Very good guess. It's more exciting than that. So APM, we're going to talk about four things throughout the day. As I've done with AFM and ASM, we'll talk a little bit about what the product is and how we use it, how we sell it. Then we'll talk about some of the key aspects of setting up something in APM. And then we're going to really do two main. There's a lot of use cases with APM like SAML, federation, and all of this, but it all really boils down to a couple of key things. Resources and authentication. So in lesson 2, we're going to talk about some of the resource types that we have, including a web top. Somebody in their presentation brought up the web top. Forgive me, I always forget. I forget who does it, but I remember the concept of it being done. Ophir? Ophir? Okay. And then lesson 3, we're going to cover one of the real reasons we use APM, the reason we still support this in our product line. It's authentication, authorization, and also what we call endpoint checking. And then after lunch, we will cover using APM as an SSL VPN for network access, which is, I think, one of the key things about using APM, why we do it. So let's start off with our overview. So how many of you are familiar with VPNs? What does it stand for? You'll want to know that in your exam. Virtual Private Network. And throughout the last 20 years, what's probably been the most commonly used VPN? IPsec. So what are some of the challenges of maintaining IPsec VPNs for your clients accessing your network?
That if you go somewhere where there's a firewall network that blocks the protocol and IPsec?
So IPsec requires some very specific ports and protocols. And so if you're behind a firewall at a customer site and you need to VPN, you may find that you cannot. What else? There's one other thing.
You're in China.
Exactly, yes. What else might be a challenge with an IPsec VPN for an administrator? Anyone?
The setup.
The setup. The setup, specifically the setup on the client side. You have to have a client program and it needs to be configured. And so if you're trying to connect from anything other than your own corporate laptop, that could be a challenge. So APM is one of the SSL VPNs on the market. I worked 10 years ago for a company called Aventail. Has anybody ever heard about Aventail? Aventail, we were just primarily an SSL VPN vendor. Got acquired by SonicWall back when I was still working there in the late 2000s. And I don't know if they've just sort of let this, I don't even know what the state of this product was, but I really enjoyed it. I really liked this product. And so when I first got here at F5, I was very excited that we had a very similar product, and it does a lot of similar things. The key to any VPN solution is we give our users access to resources. That's really what it's all about. Users getting access to resources. So we have all these users out there, a variety of different kinds of devices. We can include authentication using a variety of authentication methods. Then we can also do authorization, so we can ensure that the people connecting are only in specific Active Directory groups. And then we also can do endpoint checking, where I can verify that their device meets some minimal requirements for our remote access, like they can only be on a Windows device. I have very specific requirements for my network because of all the challenges that Mac users have used, and I say, sorry, Mac OS not allowed in my network. Go find somewhere else. And then we give the users access to different kinds of resources. One of the resource types we can give is an entire network, everything inside the network. Then we can also just give access to a single website. In fact, we can lock that down to giving access to just one single web page if we wanted to. We can also give access to what I call a client-server application. It's not the same as the whole network, but it does require more than a website. It requires some different ports to be enabled for that particular resource type. And then finally, we can give access to Windows terminal servers to do an RDP session, or Citrix clients to connect to, or VMware View desktops. So our virtualization solution there as well. So that's what we really have here. That's what we're providing, is access for our users. They don't even have to be remote users. We call it secure remote access, but they could actually be internal as well. In fact, I think and then also we can give access to an LTM pool. And we're going to talk about all this throughout the next couple of lessons. So when we're positioning APM, this is a set of features that an organization either needs or they don't need. If they don't need a VPN, it's going to be hard for us to go in there and sell them a VPN, try to encourage them to have remote access, remote users doing stuff. They may not allow users to travel or work from home, and so lost opportunity. Authentication is a great selling feature, but they just may not require it. Who knows? But if we are out there trying to compete for an SSL VPN solution, what I have found is that a lot of the SSL VPN vendors are very similar. I call it kind of an apples to apples comparison. They might have a feature that we don't have. We'll have a feature or two that they don't have, but I'll bet you in the next releases we'll have each other's features, especially if they were a popular feature. So what sets us apart? Well, one of the main things is the fact that we can support far more concurrent users through the VPN than our competitors. For example, to get the kind of throughput on the old Aventail appliance that we could do on a 10,000 series, they would have to have, 10 or 20 appliances in their data center just for the same thing. So we can support a lot more users than our competitors. We also can take advantage of everything. This runs on the BIG-IP. So it's another product that runs in TMOS, so we can use all of our optimization, TCP profiles, caching, compression, all the things that you guys have already learned how to do. And because of the fact that it is in TMOS and it runs on the BIG-IP, it's part of our consolidation story. So we can do this on the same, they don't need another vendor. They don't even need another administrator, really. If somebody knows how to go in and administer the BIG-IP, then it's not a huge learning curve to be able to now support some of these services that we're going to do. In fact, you're going to find, in my opinion, this is one of the easiest products to use that we have. Very simple. The only product that I would say is easier, as you will discover tomorrow, is WebSafe. That product is very easy to use, believe it or not. Now, this is actually a big deal. I think I brought this up last week, that when I first started, we couldn't do this on our platforms. We definitely couldn't do this because we were limited on how many modules. Also, when I started, we actually had 2 SSL VPNs. Anybody know what our other SSL VPN was? FirePass. Yeah. So we had acquired 2 different SL VPNs. This happened before I started here, so I don't really know exactly why F5 went this route, but FirePass never ran on the BIG-IP. So it was always a separate appliance, which is why it didn't fit into our portfolio at all. We also had another product called ARX, which is like a file management system that also ran on its own hardware. What we have found is when we try to buy products that need its own hardware, it's just not gonna fly for us. So APM was always written into our TMOS, and FirePass had some really good features. So what we've done over the last 6-7 years is incorporate those features from FirePass into APM and said bye-bye to FirePass. We don't have that anymore. So what you guys are going to learn about through lessons 2 and 3 today is what we call dynamic resource assignment. Here's what I'm talking about. So I've got my laptop and I'm connecting through my VPN at the corporate office, which is completely viable. Not all organizations do that, but we could do that. And I find out that when I log on using my username and password, I have access to the whole network. I can access all of our different, I can access Outlook directly. I can access, sorry, I went too far there. I can access file servers. I can get all my shared folders. Question, does that mean that I can log on to the SQL server and play around with it? No. Just because I have network access doesn't mean I can do whatever I want on the network. I can only do what I inherently could already do. But that's the key, is I can do pretty much whatever I could have done if I wasn't going through the VPN. Then I take my laptop home with me and I connect to my VPN from home, same username, same password, but I find that I don't have network access anymore, so I can't access my file shares. I can't access client-server applications. I still have access to Outlook. I can, because I'm an administrator, or a part-time administrator, I can still log on to a couple of Windows servers through RDP, only through RDP, so I can manage them. And I have access to some web apps as well. And then I go over to my mom's house. I don't have my laptop, so I connect to the VPN from my mother's computer. And I find that no longer do I have access to Outlook, but I can still get Outlook web access. And that's really what I was trying to do, is I needed to check my email. So I can check Outlook web access. And I have access to a couple of other of our back-end web applications that we use. And then on the way home, I connect to the VPN through my phone, and I find that I only have access to Outlook web access and nothing else. So my resources that I'm getting are changing based on the environment that I'm in, whatever condition I'm in. The date and time could change it. Where I'm at physically could change it. Any other number of conditions. The type of computer I'm connecting from could change it, because I'm still using the same username and password. And all of this can be done in a single access policy, which is what we're going to cover today. A single access policy. What do you suppose I'm going to attach an access policy to? Virtual server. Going back to everything we've talked about. I can give different access policies to every application that we have, which is really nice. Single access policy. So we're going to cover some very specific resource types throughout the day. Later on today, we're going to cover network access. With network access, I give access, as I said, to an entire network. When they connect, whenever our users connect, they will basically do their connection and establish a VPN tunnel created using SSL. When I used to talk about this back in the Aventail days, I used to hear companies, certain users concerned about giving access to our confidential applications through a VPN. And I would always ask them, well, do you do online banking at all? Any kind of online banking yourself personally? And they usually would say yes. So I'd say, well, how do you, this is your own money. Your money. And you're comfortable managing that across the internet? Well, it uses SSL. Great, so does this. So if you trust SSL for your own confidential money, you trust SSL. And everything we do is going to be very secure. We always are going to get an IP address assigned to us by APM. We'll configure the IP addresses. And when you think about this IP address, you want to think about it like the client is actually connected to the network. They're in the network, and they can do, as I said a few moments ago, they can do whatever they could do while they were connected to the network. We can set this up, which you'll do later today, using a wizard that we have. We have 3 wizards, as you can see. This is our network access setup wizard for secure remote access, something like that, for remote access. Very easy to do. We're going to cover that later today. Then we have another resource type called a portal resource. This is a very common SSL VPN term. Always means the same thing. First off, we still connect with SSL connection. A portal resource is any kind of a web application, a website, a web app. The only condition, it could be a single web page, the only condition is it has to be only an HTTP-based application. No other ports, protocols supported, not for a portal resource. Now there's a reason why a lot of organizations still use portal resources with their VPN. And the reason is our VPN, our SSL VPN, and all of our competitors' VPNs typically require some sort of agent on the client device to do something. And these agents can sometimes be a little problematic. The agents are always running in a browser. And our newer browsers, as our browsers get updated, they try to protect the browsers from agents running. And that causes some issues with our product and our competitors' products. No way around it. But portal resources do not require any agents at all. So it makes it very easy for us to support giving application access to a variety of different device types out there. So that can still be very valuable. Now we can set up an access policy very easily for this as well, using the portal access setup wizard. And this we'll cover after this lesson. Do this in lesson 2, and you'll do that in your exercise. And then the other thing that really sets us apart is we can give access to pools. So what you've been doing for the last several weeks since you started with LTM fundamentals, however long ago you started that, is you've been working with virtual servers, giving them access to pools, and adding different kinds of load balancing methods, adding monitors, adding ASM, adding AFM. We've done all this great stuff, but one thing we've never done is control who can access it. So we can now add that to these virtual servers by applying APM to that same device that we have with LTM. And now we can say, oh, you want to connect to my virtual server pool application, you need to authenticate first. And so we can add the same authentication, maybe authorization, maybe endpoint checking, and we can do that for pools.
But the last case you showed us, do we need to install an SSL tunnel?
An SSL which?
Tunnel.
No tunnel. Tunnel is only for network. Network, correct. Everything else just treats it like any HTTPS virtual server, really. SSL is used between client server, and then we decrypt when the packets arrive. Now this is my favorite wizard because the name is so clear and simple, defined. Web Application Setup Wizard for local traffic virtual servers. I've been waiting for several years for them to just simplify the name of that wizard and make it a little bit more clear. This we're actually going to cover later today. Later in this lesson. You guys will do this. Now here's what I love about this. It's very easy to do. You already, in your first exercise, you're going to already have a virtual server and a pool set up for the intranet of Lorax, and you're going to add authentication. As long as you know the authentication server details, for example, the Active Directory IP address, and so forth. As long as you know that, you can set that up in about a minute. Authentication in about a minute. That's all it takes. You're going to use the wizard. We have our device wizard section there on the navigation. We're going to use the third option for this feature. And what you'll see here is it just requires a few steps. The main step is, what's the authentication server? LDAP, Radius, Active Directory. We have several. We'll cover those later today. So that's the first thing, a little overview. Second thing we're going to talk about in this lesson is some licensing requirements. We haven't really talked about any kind of licensing in any of our modules, except for maybe IP intelligence. We talked about it a little bit. But this is a different kind of licensing. To talk about the licensing, I want to talk about two different ways that you typically will deploy APM in the environment. And I bring this up because this has everything to do with the licensing requirements. So the first deployment scenario is using the APM as a true SSL VPN. Just like any of our SSL VPN competitors. We're using it to give our remote users access to typically a network through a VPN tunnel, or maybe to a portal resource. Either one of those is what I call an APM resource. These are resources that are only created when you're using APM. The second deployment scenario we just talked about is when I have my virtual server and pool, and all I'm doing is adding authentication to it. We call this our user identity and access management solution. Here, this pool, this is not an APM resource. I've had this pool available forever using LTM. So APM is not being used to give out that resource. Now, of course, we can have our consolidation story and have ASM here as well, AFM, and you name it, whatever we need to have on there. So that's the first thing you want to think about in terms of licensing is kind of what is my use of this APM? VPN or just authentication? The second thing we need to think about when it comes to potential licensing requirements is how many user sessions are we anticipating? So we'll talk briefly here about a user session.
Concurrent.
Yes, concurrent user sessions, concurrent. So let's talk about what a user session is. And we're going to use Bob as the example, Bob Smith. So Bob connects to the SSL VPN solution up at the top, authenticates. As soon as Bob is authenticated and he's now holding a user access session, an access session. And he'll continue to hold that, even if he now uses his phone to connect as well. So now that he's used his phone, he's logged on using username and password, same thing, but because he's connecting from a second device, he now has a second access session. And then he connects from his tablet simultaneously, and he's now created a third access session. And he'll continue to hold those access sessions as long as he stays connected until he logs out, or an administrator could force him out if they wanted. Now, by default, APM does not control how many access sessions a user can have at one time. We can control that, but by default, it's unlimited. So we have to think about that. Now, if Bob uses his laptop to also connect here, he's now creating an access session, but on this APM down here. The only thing that cannot happen is Bob cannot have two access sessions from the same device to the same APM. With the only exception is if they're running some sort of VMware virtualization and they have a different access session from a different VM of some sort. So that's our access sessions. Then we have a second kind of session called a connectivity session, or a CCU, concurrent connection user. I don't know what CCU stands for. I always forget.
So if he's connecting, if he tries to do two connections from the same device, what does that look like for the second connection?
It's not that it, well, he couldn't connect he couldn't, you just can't, like if you're going to the SSL VPN VIP on a web browser, and it's running, you can't open up a web browser and go to that same SSL VPN VIP. It just wouldn't work.
Like you get a 404?
I don't know what you would get. I've never tried it before, but you wouldn't be able to log on again. So a connectivity session is going to be consumed anytime a user accesses one of these APM resources, like a network resource. So when Bob goes through the APM up there to the network, he consumes an access session, and then he consumes a connectivity session. Now, once he has that connectivity session established, he can access any of the resources available from this APM. Each one of these resources doesn't consume a second and a third connectivity session. Now, this is not an APM resource. So getting access to this does not use a connectivity session or a CCU. So here, we consumed an access session to be authenticated, and that was it. But we still need to do the access session. Anytime you use APM, it's going to require an access session. But if you're using APM as a VPN tunnel, then it's also going to require a CCU session, a CCU license. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't really get the difference.
The difference from which?
This case, because it's access the pool, but it has a session with the pool. That's not the case because it's not a pool.
Correct. It's not. The way I like to summarize it is if I'm accessing an APM resource, a resource available because we have APM, that requires the connectivity session. This is not a resource that we need APM for.
It's a pool.
It's a pool that is being used by LTN. So it doesn't use the CCU. So like I said a moment ago, Bob, from his laptop, can't consume 2 access sessions at the same APM, and he also can't consume 2 CCUs through the same APM. However, he could connect from his laptop, consume an access session and a CCU, and then connect from his phone and consume a second access session and a second CCU, connectivity session license. So what you guys have to think about when you're talking with your customer about using APM is, hey, do we need to, you've already licensed APM, you bought the license, you have, which bundle goes with APM? Best. So we've already got Best because we're using ASM. So do we need to purchase, in addition to that, some licenses? And I asked my whiteboard group this on Wednesday. I was giving them a little challenge because they were suggesting using APM as part of the solution for administrators to access. And I said, oh, doesn't cost us anything else? It can't cost us anything else. It's impossible for it to cost anything else. I was trying to get to this point. So here's how you think about this. There's a couple factors. First, what device are we on? What BIG-IP are we on? So in this case, we're on a 4200. And you need to know what the maximum user throughput is for your hardware device. What is the maximum number of users that we can push through this piece of hardware? Anybody know what the max users for a 4200 is? Guesses?
500.
500?
No. At least 5,000. At least.
It's 10,000. So here's the good news. As soon as our customer has APM provisioned, licensed, because they have the best bundle, we give them 10,000 access sessions for free. So all those potential access sessions they need, they don't have to pay anything else for that at all. We also give them 500 of those CCUs for free. This next customer, they're running a 10,000 series. Any guesses on what we can get through that device?
20,000.
60,000. So in this case, we give them 60,000 access sessions when they have APM provisioned. They still only get 500 free CCUs. In this case, we have a maxed out Viprion, maxed out blades, best blades we can get. Our maximum user throughput available is what? 200,000. I think I heard it. We got to know that. So it is possible, probably not likely, but it is possible we could get 200,000 remote access users through on one hardware device. Competitors can't do that. Still only give them 500 CCUs. And then this is the scenario where they're using LTM with APM. And they're only using APM for authentication purposes, not VPN. And this hardware supports 60,000 users, and it still gets 500. So for each one of these four scenarios, I have to go and talk to my customer and say, what are our needs? The first customer, they are going to be using this as a VPN. So we need to know how many users, concurrent users, and remember, Bob can have 2 or 3 sessions possibly. So how many concurrent sessions are we expecting? And they're assuming around 5,000 concurrent users, plus they want a little bit of room for growth. So they've decided to purchase an additional 7,000 CCUs. They don't have to buy any access sessions. Our competitors don't, a lot of our competitors don't give access sessions for free. So they charge for both access sessions and connectivity session licenses. This makes us no different, by the way, from any of our competitors. All of our competitors charge for this. We're pretty competitively priced as well. This customer has a bigger global VPN strategy. So they need 15,000 sessions plus room for growth. So they're going to buy an additional 20,000, giving them 20,500. Now, for any one of our hardware platforms, a customer can purchase the number of CCUs up to the number of available access sessions, but not more than. So this customer here wants to max out. They want as many CCUs as they can get. How many can they buy?
200,000.
How much is it?
200,000 per blade.
They can't buy 200,000.
You gotta take $500.
They can only buy 199,500, which will give them 200,000. Probably not likely you're going to come across that. That would be a big sale. Now in this case, they are not using this as a VPN. They're only using this for user identity and access management, which, as we just covered on the last slide, does not require any CCUs. So as long as they have APM licensed, they get the 60,000 access sessions. That's all they need for this solution is access sessions. They don't need to buy anything else. So that's why this is important for you to understand three things. Number one, are they using this at all as a VPN, which includes network resources or portal resources? Portal resources also require CCUs. So are they using it for that? If the answer is yes, what hardware platform are we on? So I know how many total users are available. And then number 3, what do they anticipate as their need for number of concurrent users at any time? And then we can put the math together pretty quickly and determine how many licenses they're going to have to buy. Questions on this, because this is the last slide for this topic.
So you're saying you can't, from one device, you can't access more than one CCU?
You can't consume more than one CCU. But when I have that one CCU, I can access all the resources that are available through that APM. I can access all the resources that are available to me. So remember that slide where I took my laptop home and stuff? Any of those resources that were made available to me, I can access at the same time using the one CCU.
For me, it's not clear. Imagine that I access to the VPN, SSL VPN, and I want simultaneously running 2 applications on different internal networks. Okay, how many CCU do I consume?
If you're going through the same APM, one.
Yes.
One. If I have to go through, now here's an important fact, is I cannot have 2 SSL VPN tunnels running at the same time on my computer. So if I've got an APM in Spokane, Washington, that I can connect through, and I have another APM SLVPN in Seattle that I can connect to, I can't connect to both of them at the same time, again, unless I'm running a virtual machine inside of my computer. So I cannot even really consume 2 access sessions. As I said earlier, I can't consume 2 access sessions from my same device.
So, and what I got from the JVPN, and I'm sure we do the same thing, is say you went and logged into the website portal and you established that CCU, and then came back and tried to connect to your client, it's going to say which session are you wanting to use.
And it'll just use that one.
Shut the other one off.
Yeah, you can self-terminate your sessions as well. So it's just not going to let you do it. It won't make a mistake.
And it's based on that because you're a limited base. So if you had 500 users concurrently going and another one tried to come in, because he was adding a second session, you'd end up taking down potentially all of them.
And a lot of people ask this question, you know, is it an actual limit or is it like a grace period? You know, do we give a grace value or something like that? No, it's an actual limit. So a user will just be told can't connect.
Which is the user experience when we reach the maximum CCU connections?
The user will really just get a message that says can't connect.
Okay.
They don't get a special dialogue or, you know, notification. We can find out as an administrator. And here's the thing, another thing about an APM policy is there are some unlimited settings. I already mentioned one, how many sessions one user can have at a time. Right? By default, it's unlimited. Another setting is how long a user session can last. That is also unlimited. So it's possible that Romain is getting ready to go on his 2-week vacation and he connects to his VPN to check his email before he leaves, but he never closes his session. And so he consumes that session for 2 weeks. That's possible. We can go in and monitor that on the APM and we could terminate those sessions if we wanted to. You can also add maximum timeouts as well. So users might just get bumped off and then they have to re-authenticate if they were actually using the VPN.
Or just like 16 hours.
What about bandwidth?
What do you mean?
The amount of throughput. So the JVPN SSL that Juniper makes, they actually are a hard set limitation, and they only allow 64 megabytes per second.
So we can control, I don't know if we can control it via bandwidth, but we can control via user sessions. How many user sessions can be used by a policy at one time? And I'll actually cover that on the whiteboard in just a moment. But I don't know if we can do it via megabits or, you know, per. It's possible. I just have never seen it.
Well, that was the only way that Juniper could say that we could support 100,000 users. It's because they put a rate limit inside their box that you cannot adjust.
Okay.
So the max that someone could get, which was hard on.
And I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if there's. I don't know if there's any kind. I've never seen anything like that with APM, and I'm the first to say that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just have never seen that as a configuration. We'll look at the configuration settings in a moment for an access profile, and we'll just see if that's something. It might just be a setting I've never acknowledged before.
Is there anywhere to see how many access sessions you've consumed? Not CCUs.
Absolutely.
But access sessions.
It's the menu item is access sessions.
Access sessions.
Yep. You guys, I don't know if you'll play with it on this, but if you ever, it's right, I don't have a lot of demos anymore, but I'll see if I can show it to you if I see a picture of it in the slide. You had a question earlier.
For authentication, can we configure a token?
Absolutely. We'll cover that more in lesson 3. Unlimited options when it comes to authentication. Yes?
So if you have multiple APMs around the world, does it have like a mechanism where it'll send it you to your closest one, or do you need to do DNS then, or?
You would need to do DNS. It's treated just like, well, that's, no, it could work. When I have a configured, like a client, we do have our Edge client. Even if you're not using the Edge client, you go to a URL. You go to vpn.f5.com. Where does that take you? However it's resolved. So yes, DNS would definitely come into play if I wanted to route them. Some people just have seattleVPN.f5.com, SpokaneVPN.f5.com or something like that. And so the user has to pick themselves. I'm not saying that's how you have to do it, but I know a lot of organizations do it that way. Is you decide which VPN you want to connect to. But you can definitely do it through a DNS.
It's weird. I get San Jose from here a lot. It's like,
As your VPN to connect to. Which actually is not bad. I don't think I think something close to San Jose probably isn't going to be noticeable, but you definitely want to try to connect to the VPN closest to you always. All right, so here's the top level object with APM. It's called an access profile. Now you might have heard me earlier use the term access policy. I'll talk about that in just a second. But in the access profile itself, this is where we're going to set some of those limits that we talked about. So let me give you a possible scenario here. Come on. And this kind of goes along with what Matt was talking about. So I've got my APM that I'm using for remote access, and I have two VIPs. I have one VIP that my employees use, and I have another VIP that I have partners that they can access. So each one of these VIPs has its own access profile. And we have a total of 5,000 CCUs on this APM. The whole APM has 5,000 CCUs. And I'm getting phone calls from my employees saying that they can't connect, they can't connect, they can't connect. So now we go in and monitor these access sessions, and we find out that these guys are consuming 4,500 of my CCUs. And a lot of them have been sitting open for 24, 48 hours or so. That's another setting that doesn't have a limit by default. How many access sessions can be consumed by one profile? So we can actually now configure that this access profile can have no more than 3,000 CCUs, and this one can have no more than 2,000, so that I can ensure that no longer happens. And we are going to do that on this screen here, along with a few other of our settings. So first off, our profile, we're going to give it a name. Under this type, for now, I would always recommend just choosing all. It means you have access to all of the APM features, so we're not necessarily limiting ourselves or hurting ourselves. It just means there might be extra features that we may or may not know if we even need. I can live with that. It's easier. And then down here, this is where we have some of these settings we want to configure, such as an inactivity timeout. If they're not using it, we can also do a maximum timeout. So either of those will prevent Roman from leaving his VPN running for 2 weeks, right? And then we have our maximum concurrent users. That's where I set the number we were just talking about up on the board. So 2,000 for my partners, and then maximum users per session. So instead of letting Bob open 20 sessions, he can only open 3 and no more at that time. So you'll see here, I'm not seeing anything in terms of size of traffic, just amount of traffic. But this still gives us some good control over what we want to do. Once I've created this profile, very simple, not a lot to creating the profile. The profile is what we now attach to the virtual server. You'll see it is specified somewhere in here. It's actually not attached right now to a virtual server. So this is what we're going to attach to the virtual server. Now I talked a little bit ago about an access policy. And this gets just slightly confusing, so I'll explain it. We have one access profile we attach to the virtual server. An access profile has one access policy and one access policy only. So an access profile and an access policy are one-to-one. Why are they not the same thing? I don't know. I just wish this was all called the same thing. Make life a little bit easier.
well, can you have one policy? Can you just reuse that policy features on another profile?
No.
Oh,
because they are connected. I can't separate them somehow and mix and match. The profile contains the policy. So the policy is where all the magic happens. The magic. And we're going to get to the policy with that little edit link for the profile. And when I click on that edit link, that's what pulls up the visual policy editor. Here's our visual excitement. This is what gets customers excited about APM, that visually appealing aspect that we talked about a little bit earlier. This is so exciting that it's the one time I create an exciting flashing animation, but you wouldn't normally see that in my slides. So remember what I was mentioning earlier about having my laptop at work, then I take my laptop home, go to my mom's house. All of those decisions are made in the access policy. So we can do several kinds of things within the access policy. We can determine things about their computer. Do they have antivirus software running? Do they have firewall software running? Do they have a client certificate identifying them as a corporate issued device? We can also identify aspects about their environment. What is their IP address? What is the date and time? I can limit this to work hours if I wanted to. And then I can gather credentials and do an authentication against a variety of authentication servers. And then I can use their account that I have, their user account, and go check group membership from something like an Active Directory server. I can authenticate them. And then what are we using this for? We're using it to give access to resources. So I define all my resource access there in the advanced resource assign. And then finally, I can clean up their session. So in other words, if they're connecting from a public computer, maybe I don't want to leave evidence of their session on that computer. So I can clean up the stuff that was created. We're going to talk about all this throughout the day. Everything we put in here. If you're going to demo APM in any way, you're going to bring them in here and show them aspects of the visual policy editor. This is something our competitors don't have, is this ability to see what is happening in a visual way, which is really cool. And then we can also give users information. So in other words, if the user doesn't have our required antivirus software, instead of just killing them, we can tell them why. And give them some guidance on what they need to do. So we have one VIP. One VIP has one access profile. That one access profile is attached to one access policy, and the one access policy has one start point. That means every user that's going to this VIP starts at the same place. And then they go through branches based on whatever environment they're in. And then we have several different ending points. And we have three configurable ending points. One is the allow, one is the deny, and the third is not remediation. The third is a redirect. It's called a redirect ending, and I can redirect them to any URL. So instead of just giving them a denied dead ending, I can send them to a website inside of our environment or anywhere that gives them instructions on how to set up their antivirus or whatever it is I want to do. So that's kind of cool. A lot of stuff we can do in here. So let's talk about how a user ends up somewhere along here in the branching. So as I said earlier, all of our users start in the same place. And whenever there's a fallback branch, what that means is all users go there. When there is let me rephrase that. When there's only a single fallback branch and nothing else, all users go there. And that's usually for one of two reasons. In this first example, everybody is going to fill in login credentials. I'm not making a decision here. I'm only gathering information from the user. So when I gather information from a user, typically all users move on the one fallback branch. The other situation is where I have a message box. Now I'm not gathering information, I'm telling information. I'm not making a decision. I'm just telling information. And typically after a message box, we just have the one fallback branch. But now we come to an item, one of our many item types, that typically have two branches, a successful branch and then a fallback branch. In these items, we're typically checking for one thing. Do you have this? Because the answer is always either yes or no. Did you authenticate successfully? Yes or no. Do you have this antivirus software? Yes or no. That's all I care about. I love having that, you know. The timing could have been a little bit better right when I hit my exciting point. Then I had the drum roll. That's my text notification. So in this case, so if they did log in successfully, they move along that branch. If they didn't, in this scenario, the fallback branch really should say failure. Success at the top, failure at the bottom. These are the people that failed whatever check we were doing. And then these users all get information, they all go to the fallback branch, and they're all denied access. That's how they end up there if they didn't authenticate successfully. Now, for all the successful users, they go to a different item type. In this item type, I'm not checking something yes or no. In this item type, I'm looking at something about them, something about their computer, and I'm matching it to a different possible outcome. For example, what client OS do they have? Do they have this one? If they have this one, they go this way. If they have a different one, they go this way. Another example is group membership. If they're in the employees group, they go here. If they're in the partners group, they go here. So now, in this case, we're going to look at their device. And because this user's got an Apple phone, they'll now follow the Apple branch. When you have this kind of a branching system, it's always important to remember that we travel the first branch we match. And we never follow a branch to the end and then come back and check and go to another branch. Once you start heading on a branch, that's where you're going. You're not going to ever traverse back. So think about the fact if you're using a group membership branching and you've got the employees branch and then you've got the sales branch. Well, all of my sales users are employees. But if I have them ordered that way, all of my sales users are going to go the employees branch because it's first. They'll never make it to the sales branch. So I'd want to swap those two. In this case, it's impossible for me to match two branches. So all of my iPhone users are going to get their resources and then they're allowed access. In this case, we're going to scan this device, and this user is using one of those strange things called a Windows phone. Well, I don't have a branch for a Windows phone. So in this case, more often than not, the fallback branch doesn't signify a failure. It just means they didn't match one of the branches up above. And I can either say, okay, all the rest of these users, they'll just get these resources and still give them access to stuff. In this case, I'm telling them we don't support Windows phones and they are going to be denied. So that's sort of how we set this up. And there's absolutely no wrong way to do this. It's just whatever we need. And that's, again, one of the real benefits of using this, is complete flexibility. The Aventail device was nothing like this. It was very rigid on how you gave access to stuff.
I'm assuming those allows, they could be like different allows, like if you're a Windows and Android user, you can have them access certain applications, and then Mac and...
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of what we had there, is that each one of these different devices has a different set of resources that I'm giving. So what that means is when I'm connecting from my laptop, I'm going to get one set of resources, but when I'm connecting from my phone, I'll get another set of resources. But only if, actually I don't have any some checks. I don't have like an antivirus check over there. All right, so last thing, and then you get to do your first exercise. How do we set this up on a VIP level? Very easy. The VIP does need to be an SSL VIP. This is an SSL VPN. You want to remember that. We do need an HTTP profile. Anytime we're doing something at the application layer, we need to have an HTTP profile. And then we're going to go down and we have to have our client SSL profile so that we can decrypt these requests. And then we have our access policy section. Now once again, our naming here, I'm going to be honest, don't like it. Because we have the access policy section that contains an access profile which contains an access policy. I think that's strangely worded, but you guys at least now understand it. So this is where we'll define the access profile that we created. Two other things that are going to be taken into consideration. If this access profile is going to give out portal resources of any kind, we'll need to have a rewrite profile also identified. If we're going to give out any kind of application access, whether it's a network tunnel or the client server app that we also call an app tunnel, we'll talk about that next, then we'll need to have a connectivity profile. The good news is, if you're using the wizard to set this up, it'll do all this for you. So you don't really even have to worry about it. Because more often than not, you don't necessarily need to customize these very much, if at all. One new thing that just got added with v13 is if you're given any RDP access. We talked about being able to do Citrix hosts or remote desktops. There is another new profile that you have to add to the virtual server, and you guys will do that in lesson 2, your exercise, so you'll see where that's at. Questions? Ready to try it? So again, you're going to see that you can add authentication to your existing application setup, your virtual server pool. You can add authentication in just a matter of seconds. And then, so you're going to do that, and then you're going to look at the visual policy editor, and you're going to make your first mild change with the visual policy editor, and you'll see the results. This should take us no more than a half an hour if you've got your environment running and ready to go. I do want to point out one thing, very, 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 very important at the beginning of this exercise. So let's all turn to that together. Where are we at? We are at page 100. You have to reset 2 clocks. The Windows clock, as you've been doing, and you have to, unfortunately, I've tried to fix this. I don't know why it does this in Ravello, but it always resets the Active Directory clock to like Greenwich Mean Time, I think it is. So you have to manually configure the Windows server clock as well. If you don't set them properly, authentication is going to fail. It's not going to let you authenticate if the clocks are off. All right? We good on that? Okay. 9:45, we'll pick up again.